Great to have you back for the Corpora podcast, where I sit down with leading professionals and thinkers to talk all things startup law, entrepreneurship, and technology. Corpora is your startup's legal dashboard. We help startups and their counsel, if they have one, to take care of their legal tasks, from hiring to issuing options, fundraising, protecting IP, and more. Check us out at corpora.us. It's free to sign up. My name is Tapan Khazritsyan. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Corpora, and I'm thrilled to introduce our special guest for today, a great human and a great CEO, Naré Vardanyan. I'm going to read out Naré's very impressive bio. Naré is co-founder and CEO at Ntropy, building the vertical AI company for finance. Ntropy is based in NYC with offices in London and Lisbon. It has raised over $40 million in venture funding and has over 20 employees across the United States and Europe. Naré was born and raised in Armenia. She's an alumnus of Yerevan State University, Department of International Relations, as well as University College London, where she studied politics, and security. She participated in the UNDP Young Professionals Program in New York City. She has also been the co-founder at Mindbin, a mental health startup focused on predictive analytics for bipolar disorder, which she later exited to Mercer Group. She then joined the investment team at the Mayor of London's fund, LCIF, focusing on artificial intelligence. She has also invested in over 35 early-stage applied AI companies with AI Seed in London. Naré, so great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Naré, you are an exceptional founder and a CEO. You've done this many times over, and you've been with Ntropy for a while now. But for those in our audience who may be unfamiliar with Ntropy, could you please share what you're building?
Sure. So we started Ntropy to build language models to understand financial data at scale, any format, any language, any country, any currency. The world's financial data is very fragmented, even in the United States, which is a very developed financial services system. If you look at your statement, oftentimes you wouldn't recognize what it says, even if you have the context and you know what you've purchased. We take all of that information across statements, receipts, invoices, card transactions, and make it unified to be able to make decisions on it.
So I've looked into your product while we were preparing for this podcast, and it's very neat that you do. And essentially, you're translating the gibberish that we see on bank statements. Like you see these acronyms and incomplete words and phrases in the statement. You're translating that into a human readable format for decision making. Is that a fair understanding?
Yes. That's exactly what we do. And the reason we do that is because most of the back office of financial services is still run by humans, and it's very expensive. If you think about compliance, know your customer, know your business, onboarding, risk, fraud. These are very expensive and human-heavy processes. And this is why financial services in general is a very expensive business. Banks survive only because of the amount of capital they have, and they have the lowest NPS. They don't often provide a good service, but it's very hard to compete with them. So if you break the back office and make it cheaper and more accessible, you can have better financial services.
Got it. That is fascinating. Now, let's go back to the very beginning. You, along with your co-founder, you guys started Ntropy back in 2018. I want you to sort of time warp back to, 5 years ago when you were just starting out, and you essentially had options on how to start that company. There are a multitude of sort of company formation, automation companies out there. You could use one of those, or you could hire a lawyer to do this. Which path did you take? Why? And looking back, was that the best decision, or would you have done things differently now?
Yeah, that's a good question. We actually spent quite a lot of time on this. In terms of picking the country first, where did we want to incorporate? Back then I was based full-time in London. I still live in London, just travel a lot to the US and back and forth. And my co-founder was there too. So we had an option to incorporate with Companies House in the United Kingdom, or start a Delaware C Corp, which is the majority of the most successful startups in the world have been started in Delaware. And we always knew we're going to fundraise in the US. So we decided that would be the best option. I also knew from experience in investing before that if you do want to go to the US market from the UK and you do a flip, it's very expensive. It's much more expensive than starting a branch if we wanted to have a UK establishment. So yes, we were like, okay, we're going to do a Delaware C Corp. We didn't have money to spend on lawyers. And the easiest way was Googling what's available. So we found Stripe Atlas. I remember it was fully bootstrapped and we didn't have really high-paying jobs before that either. So it's not like we had a ton of savings. So there was a female founder program where they would even waive I think it was $1,000 fee or something to get started.
Okay.
So we signed up for that and we got started via Stripe Atlas. It took a couple of minutes. They give you your incorporation documents and you get a bank account, an EIN in the US. So yeah, that's how we did that.
And in the meantime, you've built a company that is about to raise its Series B round. You raised over $40 million in venture financing, and all started with a corporate formation automation company such as Stripe Atlas. And looking back, that worked pretty fine for you.
Yes, but we had a lot of hiccups.
Okay.
I love Stripe Atlas. I think it's a great product. It allows you to do things very quickly, and it's quite simple and affordable. But there were a lot of documents that we needed to sign and fill in, etc. They were there in templates. Obviously, there's no lawyer that will follow up and tell you what you need to do. So we missed out on a few things. And I remember when we were raising after a pre-seed, like a proper seed round in 2020. We figured out that we actually never bought our own options. And that was a very expensive process of doing that back then. The share price had changed. The documents were missing. We had to reach out to Stripe support to see if there were any documents that were signed. Obviously, this was coming from not a lot of experience or not having paid attention. When you're building a company, I think the legal part of it is the last thing you want to think about. There are so many other things. But yes, we had to pay for those misses. It's not necessarily the platform's fault, but it was more just lacking enough support to be able to navigate everything.
It sounds like, thinking about this, and this is a topic that always comes up, right? Because when you have legal technology, there's this bias towards standardization, like trying to templatize whatever can be templatized. And it seems like it sacrifices the human touch as a result. But law can never be fully standardized. It can never be fully templatized. But on the opposite side, you don't want a situation where you have to talk with a lawyer for everything, or rather involve the lawyer for everything. So I think the balance is key here. Like it has to be somewhere in the middle where you can rely on legal tech to get a lot of stuff done. But that 5-minute check-in with a lawyer or having that strategic guidance by a lawyer, just like you implied just now, can go a long way in terms of keeping you from a headache and possibly a big bill down the line. Yes,
for sure. And I think context is king, right? You almost want templates that would understand context and your specific context and then would solve the problem for you. That's what a lawyer does. They hear you out, they ask a few questions, and then they have a solution. And I think that's what we've been missing in the templates because, yes, it's a bunch of documents that are the same for every single case, yet your case is slightly different. And then that can create a lot of headache and costs down the line.
And you just gave the definition of the practice of law, which is essentially applying the law to the facts or the context, as you mentioned, which is important. So as I understand it, you didn't work with a lawyer from day one with the repercussions there too. When was it? What was that trigger that sort of hinted or implied that, okay, now we have to hire a lawyer. We can't continue on like this?
When we were raising our seed round, things got serious. We had a big venture fund interested, and we knew that we need to get a lawyer to do the round. We engaged with quite a well-known law firm that was doing deals internationally as well, and so that's how the process got started. And it should have been a very straightforward. I mean, a seed round is a straightforward raise, but we had a few things that we needed to clean up from, not having a lawyer from before. So that took some time, but in the end, we got there.
And this was how many years after founding, if you're okay with sharing that?
Yeah, so this was 2020, end of 2020, 2021. So we started the company in 2018. Frankly, we did not really know what we were going to build. we had this general idea about a data platform to train better machine learning models. And the goal was to get interesting data to be able to do that. And we thought, well, healthcare is interesting, finance is interesting. So we had variations and multiple pivots on how to, what to do and how to do and what to build. It was bootstrapped, and then we raised a pre-seed where, again, we didn't really engage any lawyers. It was just done on safes. So when we were raising our proper seed round, 2.5, 3 years later, it was... we had a bunch of safes and things had piled up and all these documents. So we needed to clean it all up to do things like they should have been done.
There's this one line which regularly comes up while I worked with startups as a startup lawyer, but also now as I build technology for startups. It's keeping your house in order. It's like making sure that all your T's are crossed, I's are dotted, and especially avoiding the irreversible mistakes or the mistakes that can be reversed, but it's going to be costly to reverse. But I'm curious, before hiring that lawyer for the Series Seed round, how did you take care of your legal tasks? Was it like talking with people who had done it before, Google search, templates, other technology? What was your approach?
Yeah, we used a variety of these platforms that had ready-made templates and things, from like contracts to, whenever we needed something, we would just get something from the internet and then adapt it. I would say it's getting more popular to talk about this regarding finance. When you're starting a company, you do your first financial model, and you need to have an understanding of how things work because that's a part of your story. I think it's less so in terms of legal, but it needs to be like that more because a lot of the times you're very blind in what you're doing. If you don't have a legal background, you don't have a very good understanding. Even thinking about shares and how you do vesting between you and your co-founders, etc., or employment contracts and so on and so forth. So we just used whatever was out there and different templates, and that was it.
Is it fair to say, when you say the founders are blind, is it fair to say that you would prefer to have some kind of roadmap, like a playbook to follow as you take this step by step?
I would want to understand more of what was actually happening. It's not necessarily being all too familiar with all the legal terms and so on, but just having a better understanding, vesting schedules, cliffs, all of the special jargon that you get to learn because you have to. But I think it's important to educate yourself and spend some time on it because if you don't, then there's a lot of situations when those things pop up and it can be quite tough to navigate. And there's consequences, obviously. Even like term sheets, right? What happens is when you get a term sheet, the first thing you do, you run it by your lawyers, and they will, there's lawyers who will fight for every single word, and they have a very pro-founder position. There's lawyers who would just do what needs to be done. You just want to make decisions on your own, negotiating what to give, where to, insist on what needs to happen. You need to know things, and I don't think there's enough knowledge. Majority of founders, they learn this as they go. They make the mistakes during their first startup. They get kicked out from the board after, and then they come back and they already know what's up, and they make it very tight.
We've seen that before several times. Naré, so just to make sure I follow, even if you're working with a lawyer, you're paying someone to do this for you, you as a founder, and as your advice to other founders, you would suggest being educated on these topics just to know what's going on.
Yes. It's. I mean, you might have a CFO and accountant down the line, but you want to know your financial model and you want to understand how your business works. I think in a similar way, you want to know the basics of your legals. It's super important.
Let's talk founder pet peeves. There are obviously things that lawyers do that drive founders nuts. Right?
Yeah.
Obviously, lawyers aren't the most affordable professionals out there.
Yeah.
Some charge very handsome lawyerly rates. But to give you an example, a founder pet peeve can be the lawyer applying their handsome hourly rate to very menial tasks that can be done by a paralegal or a non-lawyer or automated altogether. I'm curious if you've had the chance to sort of identify any of those pet peeves of lawyers doing things that you don't find quite amenable.
I mean, we've had partner emails that had a hefty fee they came with that were just simple yes or no answers, or but from my experience, you can negotiate with lawyers. You just need to know that mostly you can, bring the fees down if you're a startup and so on. What I do not like, and I've had experience with this, is when things that are simple get overcomplicated. And that takes time to resolve, and those email threads, and then you get the fee. I think that's, just not, that's a waste of founders' time, everybody's time. And I've seen situations where very simple things that could be easily resolved, just going back and forth in circles. That's something I hate. And we've changed legal firms that we work with for this. They had a great reputation and were great professionals, but they would just overcomplicate every single matter.
Sometimes, and I think you sort of touched upon this when you were talking about term sheets, where you have lawyers that are very pro-founder and fight for everything, and lawyers that are more easygoing. Sometimes you come across a lawyer, for better or for worse, that is very academic, if I may, very theoretical. And again, it comes up in negotiations, right, where they would sort of pay attention to every comma, every word, even if it's inconsequential from a business perspective. That's why I think it's important for your lawyer to have this business understanding and not only be a legal professional, but a business partner to you as well. And it sounds like when you mentioned this pet peeve, this is what this is what you had in mind.
Exactly. Having the context for your business, for the situation, understanding again, like term sheets, they take time, and that time sometimes, you're raising money when you're running out of money. More often than not, that's the case. So every founder knows who's fundraised that until cash hits your bank account, you can't sleep because anything can happen in between. It can happen pre-term sheet, it can happen post-term sheet, it can happen when you're doing the long-form documents and so on and so forth. So as a founder, you always want to get it done as soon as possible so that cash hits your account and you can go to sleep for a few days at least. And the lawyer that has the context and understands and doesn't drag this is very valuable, but also doesn't give in to things that need to be negotiated.
Exactly. And as you were recounting this, my own experience as a startup lawyer came to mind, and I had a few price round flashbacks in my head because on one side you have your clients, your startups need, like they want to close yesterday. Yes. On the other side, you have your professional responsibilities to that same client, and how you balance that is a matter of finesse and professionalism and really having a steady hand and a steady foot, because very often there's this 11th hour change that comes up and you have to figure out, do I fight this? Do I prolong the closing for another week or two? Yeah. Or this is fine. I consult with my client, I advise my client that, this is the risk behind that change. I think it's fine. It's not ideal, but let's go ahead. So, spot on with that. And you really have to balance those two conflicting interests. Yeah,
that's very, very hard. But it's important for your lawyer to understand and do what's the best thing for the business. And it can be different depending on the case.
Absolutely. Now let's talk more about Ntropy. You're building groundbreaking software in the fintech vertical, fintech AI. And, two verticals out there, fintech, legal tech. They seem to be in related fields, but fintech is leaps and bounds ahead of legal tech in terms of the maturity of the software, the adoption by the players in the space. Why do you think this is the case? And what are some advice you can share with legal tech founders out there that would sort of help speed up the process of maturity and adoption?
I think it really, the software has been there for ages, right? Obviously, right now, we're going through a massive transformation with language models and what's possible in AI. But I would say even 7-8 years ago, there were possibilities to build amazing legal software. And there's a few startups who've tried, and it was always very hard. And a lot of them have failed. I think it's because of the business model of just legal professionals in general. Most of the companies who were building for law firms that charge per hour and have billable hours. If you're trying to automate anything there, that's not necessarily the best thing for the firm, because the more hours, human hours, are spent on something, the more money they make. So it's always been very, very tricky, I think, to bring automation in there. And obviously, it's the law, so the compliance, the interpretability of tech. We couldn't use models that we couldn't explain why they made certain decisions. That also made it harder, because there's that accountability part of it that was huge. And the data is the third thing. In finance, there's been a huge push by different countries, governments, regulation, private sector to open up the data and allow consumer consented, business consented data to be out there for companies to innovate on. If you look at the last 10 years of fintech innovation, a bunch of that has come from the accessibility of this data. And you have Robinhoods that suddenly anybody can trade. This is possible because you can open an account within seconds with your consent as a consumer. I don't think that has happened in legal tech. A lot of the data is within the law firms, silos, or companies, big corporates, or even startups, right? So it's very hard to get access to and train on. And only recently that started to happen. And models got very good at understanding, legal documents, because they are good at understanding language, way better than they were even 3 years ago. And I think it's an interesting time. If you look at vertical AI companies in the legal space, there's one or two that have just gotten started. Most of them have gone down the route, we're going to partner with the biggest law firms in the world, and we're going to get all the data, and then we'll see what happens. It's still, out there. We don't know what's the best model. But I think everyone's realizing that automation is coming, whether they choose it or not. So every firm in the world will start to get ready for it. I also think that we're going to end up in a world where hiring junior professionals who are going to want to sit and do audit or sit and go through pages and pages of documents is going to get harder and harder. People just would not want to do those jobs, and you will need to have some form of automation. So maybe that will change. But that's just my perspective. I'm not sure how you think about it. You obviously started a company in the space where a ton of people have failed. So these are excellent insights. And hearing you talk and applying this at the legal tech space, it sounds like it's important to have this coalition, if I may, of three various vectors, or three various poles rather. You need amenable government regulation. You need the service providers. In the case of fintech, it's the banks, financial institutions. In the case of legal tech, it's the law firms and legal services providers, and the owners of this data, the clients in the case of banks, clients in the case of lawyers, to work together in order to liberate the locked data, the data that is locked under confidentiality privileges. The government in turn sort of thawing the regulations to sort of ease what is the practice of law and easing the ethical regulations behind that. And when it comes to lawyers, maybe being more open towards that automation, and underlying that, of course, is the fee structures, not only billing by the hour, which is probably easy to do. It makes a lot of sense, but we're going to see a move away from this towards alternative fee structures as we go on, because in some cases a flat fee would be more reasonable, or a monthly subscription would be more reasonable. But we need that tripartite coalition to happen in order for legal tech adoption to really move forward. And I would suspect that it'll be a bottom-up push. It'll be push from clients which want the benefits of automation in terms of better accuracy, better speed, better prices, and even lawyers as well. It's sort of like a prisoner's dilemma game, if I may, like a game theory situation where as more and more law firms, big or boutique, take on legal tech and apply AI to their practices, there's going to be competitive pressure towards the law firms that are trailing behind to catch on. And those two together working in tandem, if not sort of indirect collaboration, but just working in tandem to put that pressure on governments, we'll see a move forward towards liberating this data and liberating regulations and see more legal tech adoption.
That's the insight that I gleaned from your comments in terms of legal tech.
Yes, and I think I'm super interested in how the business models are going to change. Like you said, there's different fee structures, ability to do payments in different ways. I would suspect if you were the first lawyer of Uber or any of the companies that are massively successful right now, and you got some delayed payment and equity instead of that, that would be a great deal as a firm. Or you got a flat fee and some equity structure that was vesting and so on. So I do think services companies, the way they charge as we move away from humans doing hours of work, that needs to change. And what we're talking about maybe is too primitive. Maybe there'll be more beautiful models of how to do this. But I think that's where the innovation is going to come from. And for that to happen, you need the founders to start not using their lawyer as often. And then the lawyers getting less emails. They can bill less anyway, so they have to adopt technology too. But I do agree the market, movement will be bottom up rather than top down.
Moving further into how legal is accessed, if you had a magic wand and you could change one thing in the way startups access legal services and the way law firms deliver those legal services, what would it be?
That's
You mentioned less emails, for example.
I think every time, again, we're talking about context, and I think about it in terms of enterprise a lot in general. I think communication overload is everywhere, and it's very, very costly. Every time there is a situation, if you don't have internal legal department and you're talking with outside counsel, you have to give a very detailed overview of the situation. Sometimes you're missing details, then you have to have a trail of documents, processes, and so on. And once they get this context, then they can make some decisions or give you advice. That process takes time. It's not super efficient. I would want to change that. If there was a way of my lawyer getting, even simple things like context on everything immediately and the lowdown, and almost like imagine having an agent that reads your code base, having a lawyer that actually understands the legal setup of everything you have, and then they can advise you without you necessarily having to go through those chains of emails and answering loads of the same questions oftentimes. I think that would be great. That would save a lot of energy and would be so much more efficient.
And I think that's where the future lies. Because if you look at how startups and companies generally have accessed legal over the past years, if not decades, it's been very choppy, if I may, right? With every given legal engagement, you involve your lawyer, they come up to speed in terms of what's going on, you answer their questions, and then they give you some information, you ask questions on that information, they come up with a draft document. It's very back and forth, a lot of friction involved, especially with that email correspondence. Moving away from that to what you just mentioned, your lawyer having visibility and clarity in terms of what is going on in your startup, having sort of receptors in the company, in the legal context of the company, being privy to what's going on, and they themselves proactively reaching out to you and saying, you know what, for that, I think I should check in for 5 minutes, make sure everything is fine. For this other more complex strategic matter, I should be more involved. Obviating the need for you to reach out to them in the first place. They'll be more proactive in terms of how involved they should be, and being only as involved as necessary. It's going to be the future of accessing legal.
Yes, I think that would be perfect. You almost want them to know what's missing or, what can go wrong before something happens, right? Because that would save you from problems and you could fix issues before they happen. But for that, they need to have context and understanding of what's happening in the company. So
we're living in phenomenal times. Artificial intelligence, the singularity may be near. So is AGL possibly. What kind of world awaits us, Naré? What is your vision of the world and in terms of AI, and what role will Ntropy play in that world? And we can think 5 years from now, so not so distant future. What are your thoughts?
I'm super optimistic about everything that's happening. I think the pace of how this is going to evolve is only going to accelerate, just because of if you look at these models, the way they've been trained, it's so simple. They've just taken all of the internet and they're trying to predict the next word, and they're already so good by being so simple. What if they had a full understanding, semantic meaning of things? What if they could have a model of the world that they actually understood? I think all of these things will come, and it would be fascinating how everything evolves from there. But sometimes I think about AI threat, and I read a lot about it, and a lot of very smart people talk about it. And then you look back at the world that we live in today, and there's so much human threat. I was thinking about this, especially in the last couple of weeks, as we saw what was happening in Armenia back home. And, on the one hand, people are concerned about AI taking over and human race ending and killing us, murdering us. On the other hand, real people are murdering other people and taking their homes and making them leave where they are. And these are very different realities. It's almost like parallel, right? People in Armenia, or our compatriots, or people we went to university with, were worried and couldn't stay where they were born and raised because of the threat of war and genocide, and they had to escape. And then here we're worried about, AI taking over our lives and and something bad happening. So that's crazy to think about. I think in that context, the most important thing, I'm not so scared of the machines yet, just because they're very simple and we kind of understand how they work. And I don't think GPT-4 or even 6 is going to be very scary. But what is scary is having not equal access to those models and intelligence. So if certain countries have access to that intelligence and others don't, if certain parts of the population have access to that type of intelligence and others don't, that becomes suddenly a very different world, way more hierarchical. I think there needs to be more effort in making sure this is not the case. What we're trying to do at Ntropy is a tiny effort in that global picture, but we really want to make financial intelligence cheap and accessible wherever, whether it's Brazil, Portugal, Mexico, even the Middle East, where there's very heavy data regulations, because if you don't do this, you will have this world of extreme hierarchy. People making decisions and other people not even realizing how they're governed. Probably some people would already say that that's happening today, but I think we still have some, freedom of choice, and we might lose it if this doesn't get resolved. The open source effort is very important there, and maybe there will be some other solutions, just more companies having access and building this stuff, so it's not one or two.
We definitely have a much more fundamental issue to tackle right now in terms of, as you mentioned, actual humans weaponizing tools to commit ethnic cleansing in the 21st century, and international organizations falling deafeningly silent in the midst of all that. So the challenge then becomes, how do we keep those same humans from weaponizing artificial intelligence, which becomes a much more realistic danger if we have that hierarchy, that unequal division of access to these models.
Yeah, I think that can be potentially very dangerous, and GPUs are expensive, and at some point having access to GPUs is going to be as important as having oil, if not more important. I think you either need to make them cheaper so that they're accessible to more people around the world, or there needs to be alternative ways of building intelligence. Otherwise, it's going to be terrifying. We saw what happened with oil becoming and electricity becoming a dominant force, and now this is the next level of that.
Nara, thank you so much for sharing these brilliant insights with our audience. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thanks for having me.
My guest today was Naré Vardanyan, co-founder and CEO at Ntropy. Thank you for watching, and Nara, thank you so much again.
Thank you.